Chapter 161 Twin Sister. Owen sat across from Kevin Rodrigo in the sleek, imposing office of Rodrigo Enterprises where he worked. A cigarette was between his slender fingers. He exhaled the smoke, clouding his vision of Kevin sitting across from him in the office. If there was one thing he wanted more than ever, it was for the man to disappear from the face of the earth. But he couldn't act on his plan of killing him yet, because he hadn't gotten the opportunity to do so when he was so worried about his beloved wife-to-be. "You said you wanted to see me." Owen broke the silence in the office. "What's it about?" A slow smile curved Kevin's aged face as he began to speak, leaning back on the leather chair. "You don't sound eager to see me, though," he said. "Is it because I denied you the position of taking over the Dockroll's second branch in Zen and gave it to Simon when I'd already promised you the position?" he asked, his voice laced with mockery. Though when he'd first met Owen, Kevin had thought the young man was so much like him. But now, he was starting to realize Owen was 10 times smarter than him. If he wasn't careful, it would only be a matter of time before he'd take over the entire underworld from him. Not to mention the fact that the boy was in love with the girl he wanted to get rid of so badly. Owen's fingers slightly tightened around his cigarette, but his expression remained blank as he said, "I don't care who you give the position to. Simon can have it, for all I care." He lied. "Oh, then that's good. Now we can talk about the reason why I'm here then." He said, "My spy in the military reported to me yesterday that they've got a lead on Wayner's whereabouts," Kevin declared, his voice carrying an air of superiority, which Owen hated more than anything. But the good news made him overlooked at this time. "Really? How?" He leapt off his chair, dropping his half-smoked cigarette on the floor due to his exhilaration. Rain Wallace's phone was tracked, and the military discovered she'd been in contact with Mia, and they somehow tracked down the number, he informed casually. Owen's expression brightened instantly at that information. For days now, none of his men were able to track down Neil's whereabouts, and he hadn't been able to rest because of his worries that Wayner would do something to his woman. "That's incredible. Do we know where they are now?" But before Kevin could respond, a shadow of disappointment crossed Owen's face as realization dawned on him. "Wait," Mia called Rain, "not me," he muttered, his excitement dampened by the pang of betrayal he felt at that. He'd been worried sick for her, and he'd even hired a professional psychologist to explain to the media that his woman was taken against her will and hadn't been an accomplice with a psychopathic criminal. Was he perhaps overthinking it, and that Mia had tried to call him first when his phone was turned off yesterday? Kevin's dark laughter sliced through his thoughts like a blade. "You must be trying to look for some sort of excuses to deceive yourself again," he taunted, his voice dripping with malice. "Your girl is not loyal to you. She would have called you, but instead, she called her friend. Tisk. You should listen to me when I told you that that girl has no feelings whatsoever for you. It wasn't built to feel those emotions." Owen's fist clenched into a tight ball at his side, his jaw tightening with anger. "You have no idea who Mia is," he spat, his voice low and dangerous. "She might have been your unwanted daughter, but I know her better than you do. She's compassionate and generous, just as any human, and I'd appreciate it if you see her like one, instead of your disposal smuggling tool." Kevin's smile fell, replaced by an ominous glare. "First and foremost, that piece of shit is not my daughter," he snarled, his voice chilling. "I have only one daughter, Marina. I don't know who that person is. Secondly, let me make one thing clear. If Mia, or whoever she is proven to be an ally of my enemies, not even you can protect her from me." He issued the warning and continued. "You claim to know her better than I do, but were you aware that she knew that Wayner boy even before she crossed paths with you? Did you know that as a child, she was mentally and obsessively fixated on the boy, even though he was unaware of her existence but knew her sister?" Owen went still upon hearing that. "What are you saying?" he asked, bracing himself for the truth that was about to hit him about Mia's puzzling childhood obsession with gray eyes. "You heard me right. Before she was brought to Whispering Way, she resided in Mirage Mesa and was acquainted with Wayner prior to your involvement. She was so obsessed with him she'd go crazy when my men tried to stop her from going to watch him play some fucking guitar. Before she met that bastard, she'd been acting exactly the way I wanted her to be, obedient, emotionless, and useful for my business, until that boy came into the picture and awakened some damned emotions in her. So tell me, how could she love you when she is with the man who'd awakened her human feelings?" In that moment, Owen realized how much he'd overlooked throughout the years about Mia's feelings for him. He realized her obsession with gray eyes wasn't just a fleeting feeling, and that for the past 5 years he'd done everything to make her open up and love him had been a waste of time, because her heart had long belonged to another. However, despite those realizations, he refused to agree that she felt nothing for him. If she felt nothing for him, then why did she agree to marry him? And why would she come to his house every weekend to cook for him like a lover would to her man? Kevin Rodrigo, Owen realized with a surging hatred for the middle-aged man, was saying all sorts of bullshit just so he would let go of Mia, which was impossible in this lifetime. Nothing would ever make him give up on her. And what Kevin said next proved to Owen that the man was only trying to make him let his beloved go. Don't be disheartened. Marina will be back in the country soon. Feel free to pursue her, as you have nothing to lose since she resembles Mia, Kevin stated. I've also dispatched my men to track down the military and locate Neil's hiding spot. Owen was suddenly torn between amusement and sorrow at Kevin's remarks. He'd met Marina once abroad when he went there for some meeting. While she bore a striking resemblance to Mia, she could never take Mia's place. There was something unique about Mia that would make a man want to cherish and protect her all the time, whereas her twin was a complete opposite to his loving and generous Mia. But because he didn't want to anger Kevin by telling him to his face that he'd choose Mia 1,000 times over his beloved daughter, he kept quiet and made a silent plan to protect the woman he loved by all means. Chapter 162: The Helicopter at the Cabin. At the mountain cabin, Mia glanced out the kitchen window at the setting sun. She then put down the knife she was using to cut potatoes and went into the living room to turn on the television. A satellite dish somewhere on the mountain enabled them to bring on the entertainment and news channels, and she hadn't heard the news since this morning when she'd woken up nestled in Neil's arms. When they woke up this morning after their all-night lovemaking last night, Mia had felt sore all over her body. Not to mention the hickeys she'd discovered when she was taking a shower. He'd marked her entire body last night. Never in a million years did she expect she'd allow a man, who she wasn't married to, mark her the way Neil had done every night. And for some reason, she felt no guilt for that, because without Neil, she'd rather be single forever. Her love for him went deeper than anyone could ever imagine. Neil had spent the entire day clearing the road all the way down to the frozen river, using a huge tractor he drove out from the back of the cabin. Now he was taking a shower in their room. This morning, when he first told her that he planned to clear the snow out of the road, she had thought he intended for them to leave today or tomorrow, and she'd been seized with a sudden panic that nearly strangled her. But as if he read her thoughts, he assured her with a quick kiss on the forehead, "I'll tell you the day before it's time to leave." When she tried to get him to say if he already knew what day that was going to be, he replied vaguely that he wasn't certain, which gave Mia the impression he was waiting for something to happen, or for the man who'd been helping him to contact him. Neil was right when he told her that the less she knew, the better off they both were. And he was equally right to insist they simply enjoy each moment of the time they had together and not think beyond that moment. He was right about everything, but it was impossible not to wonder and worry what was going to happen to him next. She couldn't imagine how he could hope to find out who committed the murder when his face was so well known that he would be recognized immediately wherever he went. However, he had been skilled with disguises, so makeup and disguises would be his only choice. She was counting on that to keep him safe when they would step out of this mountain. And she was terrified it wouldn't be enough. Mia sighed and turned on the television. Its screen lit up. She then listened absently to some psychologist who was evidently a guest on the news channel as she headed back to the kitchen. She was nearly there when she realized the psychologist was talking about her, and she whirled around. Eyes wide with disbelief, she walked toward the television, staring at the subtitle on the screen that identified the speaker as Edward Andrew, Ph.D. He had been invited to explain the psychology behind Mia Harrison's behavior and emotions. With absolute confidence, Dr. Andrew was now explaining what Mia was going through emotionally as a result of being Neil's hostage. A great deal of research has been done with hostages like Miss Harrison, he was saying. I myself wrote a book on this subject, and I can tell you with all certainty that the young lady is living through a highly stressful, but very predictable series of emotions. Mia tipped her head to the side, fascinated to learn what was going on in her mind from the point of view of this unknown expert on television. She didn't know what was going on and who sent him, but she stood there listening to what he was saying. During the first and second day, fear is the primary emotion, and a very paralyzing one, I might add. The hostage feels helpless, too terrified to think or act, but they hold out hope that they'll be rescued. Later, usually on the third day, rage sets in. Rage at the injustice being done to them and at the victim role they're forced to endure. With amused disdain, Mia held up her fingers and began to count off the days and her emotions throughout everything, comparing her reality with his so-called expert knowledge. On the first day, she had gone from fear to fury within hours and tried to slip a note to the attendant in the fast food restaurant. On the second day, she had tried to escape from him at the rest stop, and nearly succeeded. On the third day, she had succeeded in escaping. Although she had been a little afraid and extremely nervous, she was certainly not paralyzed. This so-called expert was a liar, Mia thought, shaking her head in disgust, and continued to concentrate on his next remarks. At this point, Miss Harrison has entered what I like to refer to as the gratitude-dependent syndrome. She perceives her captor as a protector, almost an accomplice, merely because he has not harmed her yet. Well, we are assuming that Wayner has no grounds to harm her, considering their shared past. Nonetheless, she is now infuriated with the authorities for failing to rescue her. She is beginning to view them as incompetent, while her captor, who is evidently outsmarting them, is reluctantly earning her admiration. Alongside that admiration, there is a deep sense of gratitude that he has not inflicted harm upon her. Wayner is an intelligent man with some degree of questionable charm, from what I gather, which implies that she is very much under his control, both physically and emotionally. Mia raised her brows at the man's bearded face on the screen. She couldn't believe he dared make up all these lies about her emotions on national news television. Placing her hands on her hips, she advised Dr. Andrew aloud, "You are lucky you aren't on one of my shows. I'd never let you get away with such silly assumptions." The only thing he had gotten right so far was that Neil was intelligent and charming and that they had some history together. She couldn't believe the man hadn't stopped to consider that, since she hadn't been taken hostage by crazed terrorists in a foreign country, she probably wouldn't be going through those things he was making everyone believe. At this point, she didn't care if they took her as an accomplice, as long as Neil's crimes wouldn't be mounting up by some silly assumption made by a so-called expert on television. With all this being said, it might have cleared her name, but not Neil's. She is going to need intensive psychological counseling in order to fully recover from this ordeal when she's released, and it will take considerable time, but the prognosis is good if she will seek help. Mia could not believe the nerve of the man. Now he was telling the world she was going to be a mental case when released. She ought to have him sued and destroyed. Who on earth even hired such a waste of space on national television? Of course, the news host interjected smoothly, "This is all true if Mia Harrison was actually taken hostage rather than being Wayner's accomplice, as some people believe she is." Dr. Andrew pondered that, stroking his beard. "In my opinion, based on what I've been able to learn about the young woman from the people close to her, I do not accept that theory of her being an accomplice." "Nobody cares about what you think," Mia told him aloud. "I don't need you to prove my innocence alone without my lovers." Mia was so engrossed in the television that she didn't register the unmistakable loud sound of helicopter blades until they were hovering directly over the house. Even when she heard the sound, it was so out of place in this quiet, mountain wilderness that she looked out of the window with surprise, not fear, because she believed there was no reason for a helicopter to be here. And then it hit her. "Oh my goodness, Neil," she screamed, turning and running upstairs. "There's a helicopter out there. It's low," she cried out in panic, nearly hitting him when they clashed into each other on the staircase as he ran down from the bedroom. "It's hovering." She stopped dead at the sight of the gun in his hand and the alarmed look on his face. "Go outside and stay in the woods, Mia," he commanded, pushing her urgently down the hall toward the back door, and yanking a coat off its hanger as he passed it and handed it to her. "Don't come near this house until I tell you to, or until they take me out of here." Neil loaded some bullets into the gun's chamber, moving down the hall with her, holding the weapon high, muzzle up, with the deadly skill of someone who knew how to handle it and was prepared to use it on the intruders outside. When Mia started to open the door, he quickly pulled her aside and stepped into the doorway alone to see the situation outside. Then, noticing the hovering helicopter, he pulled her forward and said, "Run." "For goodness sake, Neil," Mia cried, stopping just outside the door. "You can't mean to stay back here alone. What if it's the military and—" "G.O., Mia," he thundered. Mia obeyed without question, her heart hammering with fear of what was going to happen if the helicopter was sent by the authorities as she raced around the side of the house, stumbling in the deep snow, stopping beneath the trees in the woods, then moving through them, working her way around the house until she could see Neil inside the front windows. The helicopter was flying low, circling the house, stirring up the snow on the ground. Then it flew over again, and for one terror-filled moment, she thought Neil was raising his gun, intending to shoot through the window at the helicopter. If he did that, he'd be bringing attention on himself if they hadn't spotted him yet. But then she saw he was holding binoculars, watching the helicopter fly overhead and slowly disappear. Mia's knees gave out and she slid to the ground in relief that nothing worse had happened, yet. Chapter 163 Mislead the Military. Mia remained crouching on the snow-covered ground even after the helicopter had disappeared. She couldn't bring herself to move as the vision of Neil holding that gun, and trying to protect her by pushing her out of danger, imprinted on her mind. Everything happened so quickly, like it was a scene right out of a violent movie, except this was real. She felt her stomach heave, and she leaned back against a tree for support, swallowing, trying to keep her lunch and her fear of the uncertainty down. "It's all right now," came Neil's deep, reassuring voice as he walked toward her. But she noticed the butt of the gun sticking out from the waist of his pants, and her fear escalated again. Though she'd seen the gun before, and he'd even pointed it at her before, the sight of it now was bringing back some unwanted memories buried deep in her mind. Perhaps it was due to the unexpected fear that had gripped her earlier, but she didn't want to be anywhere near a gun or any violence. "I don't think it's the authorities, just some random men flying too low in a helicopter," he assured. Mia looked up at him but couldn't seem to move away from her spot. Noticing how she remained seated on the ground, he frowned in concern. "Here," he said quietly. "Give me your hand." Mia shook her head, trying to shake off her paralyzed terror with the movement and reassure him. "That's okay. I don't need any help. I'm fine." "You're not fine," he said savagely, and leaned down, grabbing her by the arms and starting to pick her up. Before she could protest, he was holding her in a bridal style. "You look so pale, like someone who's 1 second from fainting." The sickness and dizziness she felt a moment ago receded as she wrapped her arms around his neck for support and leaned on him. She then managed a shaky smile as he began to carry her back into the house. "I've seen guns before, but I just wasn't prepared for such a roller coaster." By the time they got back into the house, she was so relieved that the helicopter had been harmless that she was almost dizzy. "I think I must have overreacted to everything," she tried to joke when he put her down on the sofa. "The helicopter was harmless, but I was so frightened I couldn't walk." "Drink this," he said, walking out of the kitchen and pushing a glass of water into her hand. "All of it," he instructed when she took a sip and tried to hand it back to him. She took another swallow and put the glass down on the counter. "I don't want any more." "Fine," Neil said curtly. "Now go into the bathroom and take a long, hot bath to relax." "But I don't want to." "Hush. Don't argue with me on this. The next time He started to order her to do exactly as he said the next time something like this happened again, but he knew there could never be a next time. This had been a false alarm, but it had forced him to see the risk he was taking with her life and the terror he was subjecting her to by keeping her by his side in such a dangerous a place. If the military were to catch up to him, they wouldn't hesitate to use their guns, and if that should happen, she would be caught in a crossfire. There hadn't even been such a thing yet. She looked so terrified. The terror he saw in those large, brown eyes. God, the terror. He had never seen anyone look like she had when he found her out there, huddled in the snow, and that image would forever haunt him if he didn't do anything about their current situation. Staying with him was dangerous, and the last thing he wanted was to risk her life to save him. Few hours ago, before the helicopter arrived at the mountain cabin, in the underground parking lot of the Wallace Business Corporation Company, Rain stepped out of the elevator, her red hair tousled and her emerald eyes glinting with unshed tears from the brief argument she'd just had with Jason upon realizing he'd given the military access to her phone connection, and now they were trying to track down Mia's whereabouts. She wouldn't have been worried that Mia would finally be rescued if Mia hadn't told her to keep their call a secret, and now because of Jason, it would appear like she'd betrayed her best friend. Rain was so mad at her damned brother for invading her personal life yet again that she hurried towards her car, her heels clicking against the hard floor. But before she could reach her vehicle, a hand shot out from the shadows, grabbing her arm with a firm grip and pulling her into a secluded corner. Startled, Rain's instinct was to scream, but before a sound could escape her lips, a deep, smooth voice interrupted her thoughts. "Shush, don't you dare scream," the voice whispered, sending a shiver down her spine. In the dim light of the parking lot, Rain's eyes widened as she recognized the man before her. She squinted to make certain she wasn't hallucinating, and she realized she wasn't. It was indeed Liam Thompson, his features illuminated by a faint glow. She hadn't set eyes on him in person for many years, but here he was in front of her, pressing her against the wall, with an expression that told her he was mad as hell about something. Confusion furrowed her brows as she tried to comprehend what was happening and why her teenage crush was trying to knock the breath out of her in a quiet place like her father's company's parking lot. But his words cut through her thoughts like a knife. "I thought Miss Harrison was your friend. How could you give away her whereabouts to the military?" Liam's voice was low and tinged with anger. "Do you have any idea what sort of a mess you've caused by doing so?" Rain opened her mouth to protest, to explain, but his hand remained firmly pressed against her lips, silencing her words. She had no idea why he'd care about her best friend and what his business was in the matter, but he gave her no chance to explain that she hadn't given the phone on purpose. His dark gaze bore into hers, unwavering and intense, as he delivered his motives for being here. "If you know what's best for you, Miss Wallace, hand me your phone so I can mislead the search team heading to them right now," Liam commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. "If you want your friend to come out alive without being caught in a crossfire, don't argue with me and cooperate." The military were already preparing to head to the location when Liam left to come here. If he didn't hurry, then they'd get to Neil in no time and send him back to prison. The only way he could prevent that was by getting his hand on Rain's phone and getting his team to mislead the helicopter flying down to the mountains. He wasn't supposed to give away the fact that he was the one helping Neil from the outside, but he was desperate and in a hurry to help his friend. No other person could do this better than him. From what he'd heard, Rain was a good friend of Mia. She would do as he said if it concerned her friend's safety. Rain's heart pounded in her chest as she heard what he said about Mia getting caught in a crossfire, the weight of his words pressing down on her like a suffocating blanket. She knew her brother had messed things up for her friend, and the last thing she wanted was to lose the only person who was more like family to her than her actual family, because of her mistake. With a trembling hand, she reached into her pocket and retrieved her phone, silently handing it over to him, her mind racing with fear for her best friend. Liam let go of her mouth and took the phone. Without a word, he turned to leave, but then he stopped as if recalling something. Without turning his back, he spoke over his shoulder. "Don't tell anyone about this if you know what's best for you and Mia. I'll send someone to return your phone to you when I'm done." Without another word, he disappeared into the shadows, leaving the stunned Rain behind. Slowly and tremblingly, she reached her hand up to her mouth to touch where his large, warm palm had covered just a second ago, blinking in astonishment at the lingering warmth he'd left behind on her skin. On the other hand, Liam walked up to a car parked in a corner and handed the phone to his assistant, who was waiting for him. "Get this down to the headquarters and tell them to change the location before the helicopter arrives there. Also, tell the men to report to me about the ongoing investigation on Davina, Jason, Owen, and Rodrigo. We need to have a lead on the murderer before Neil gets caught again." "Yes, sir. What about you? Should I send another car to pick you up?" asked the assistant as he took the phone from Liam. "No need. I'll find my way back to the office. Just hurry up and get there before things get out of our hands." Chapter 164 Please Don't Leave Me, Part 1. The sky was already dark when Mia walked into the living room after her long shower and short nap. The nap helped calm her tense nerves and the banging headache that had accompanied the fear she'd felt after seeing that helicopter in the evening. Bathed and dressed in Neil's black sweater and pants, she walked down the stairs and headed towards Neil, who was standing in front of the fire, staring into it, his jaw as rigid as granite. Judging from his expression and his actions earlier, after the helicopter had left, she correctly assumed that much of what was bothering him right now was probably guilt for what he'd just put her through. But the experience had affected her in a much different way, now that it was over. She was furious that people were forcing him to live like this and determined to find out what he intended to do to put an end to it. Whatever he intended, she was determinedly resolved to convince him to let her help in any way she could to clear his name. Rather than broaching the subject immediately, Mia decided to wait until after they'd eaten dinner. Given Neil's amazing ability to shove his worries into the background, she assumed an hour or two would be plenty of time for him to get over what appeared to be an extremely black mood. Walking forward, she said lightly, "Are you going to cook tonight, or do you intend for me to do all the cooking?" He turned and looked at her for several seconds, his face preoccupied and stony. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" he asked, not even catching any of her words as he'd been so lost in thought to even notice when she'd walked down after her 1-hour nap. "I was talking about the cooking chores around here." Shoving her hands into the pocket of her pants, she teased, "Are you trying to go back on our agreement now?" "What are you talking about?" Neil asked, his mind too preoccupied with trying fiercely to believe Mia would be safe if she stayed here with him. He was trying to forget the way she'd looked when that helicopter had scared the hell out of her, crouched under that tree, shaking all over, clutching her coat to her chest. He tried so hard to convince himself that it had been an unrelated incident with the military and that wouldn't be repeated again. But deep down, he knew better than to risk her life again because he didn't want to part ways with her. The thought of it alone was so heartbreaking he didn't want to think about it anymore. Mia gave him one of her breathtaking dimpled smiles and said, "I am talking about cooking chores, Mr. Wayner. We have made the agreement that you'd be the one to cook for as long as we are here, but for the past 2 days, I've been the one doing all of it. It's so unfair, don't you agree?" Neil managed an unconvincing imitation of a smile and nodded. All he wanted to do at that moment was take her to bed and lose himself in her, to forget for a blissful hour what had happened and what he now knew had to happen next, and much sooner than he'd planned for it to happen. He couldn't step into the main world when his face was already known. All he could do was wait for Liam's investigation to be over, and before that, he couldn't continue to risk Mia's life. Her life mattered more than the fleeting attraction he had for her. A few minutes later, Neil was done cooking and the pair sat down beside the fire, as usual, to eat their dinner. However, Mia's hope that Neil would bounce back from his somber mood proved to be a little too optimistic this time. He wasn't as playful as he'd been the other day. He was polite but preoccupied throughout most of their meal. Now that she had cleared the dishes away, she was thinking about a way to trick him and make him loosen up and tell her the thought that had been bothering him. She resorted to using wine to get her way into his mind. Perhaps if he got drunk, he'd tell her everything. After all, it had been said that people let out their deepest burdens when they got drunk. She wanted to take away his burden, and she felt she had a better chance to get forthright, complete answers if he were relaxed and his guard was down. Leaning forward, Mia picked up the bottle of wine and carefully refilled his glass for the 5th time after their dinner. Then she handed it to him, congratulating herself on her subtlety. Neil looked from the wine glass to her face. "I hope you aren't trying to get me drunk," he stated dryly, "because if you are, wine isn't the way to go about it." "Shall I get the vodka instead?" Mia asked, stifling a nervous laugh at the fact that he'd seen through her plan to get him drunk. Neil stopped with the glass halfway to his lips, finally realizing that she had been deliberately trying to pour wine down him as fast as he could drink it, as well as watching him with a strange look throughout most of the meal. What was she up to now? He thought as he gave her a narrowed look. "What are you up to?" he asked. "Nothing," she replied. With a feeling of vague suspicion, Neil watched her shift positions so that her back was against the arm of the sofa and she was facing him. Her opening question seemed like a joking and innocuous one. "Neil, wouldn't you say I've been a good hostage?" "Indeed," he agreed, smiling a little at her contagious humor and trying to match her mood instead of letting himself drown in his uncertainty about the future. "Wouldn't you also say I've been obedient, cooperative, pleasant, orderly, and that I've even done more than my share of the cooking?" "Yes, to all but the obedient part." She smiled at that. "And as a good companion, don't you agree that I'm entitled to certain, well, extra privileges?" "What sort of privileges do you have in mind?" He raised a curious brow. "I want the privilege of knowing all of your thoughts." Mia watched his expression turn guarded. "Possibly. It depends on the thoughts you're referring to," he said, sipping his wine slowly. A little unnerved by his unencouraging response, she nevertheless went ahead to speak. "What do you intend to do from here on? I mean, how do you plan to find the main murderer?" "I want to be of help." "No, change the topic," he said flatly, not wanting her to get more involved in anything that has to do with him or his problems. "Okay. Do you have any ideas about who the real murderer could be?" "Try a different topic." Neil's unnecessary curtness grated on her, not only because loving him made her extremely sensitive to his attitudes, but because Mia honestly felt she was entitled to answers on what he planned to do from here on, if he even intended to keep her or allow her to be of help. Keeping her voice sincere and level, she said, "Please don't brush me off like this, Neil." "Then please pick another topic, am I more?" Will you stop being flippant and listen to me? Try to understand that as much as you want to know the real murderer, I want to know as well. My mom was one of the victims, and if not for her, I want to be of help to you as well. I want to know exactly what happened that night and how you got framed for a crime you didn't commit. You were seen on camera exiting the parking lot. Alaric had been killed. Please tell me what really happened. You'll find it all in the newspapers. You are a journalist and it won't take you a day to find all of the reports about my case. Look it up when you get home, he said calmly and uninterestedly. One thing he knew for sure was that Mia Harrison was as stubborn as a cat. She wouldn't give up once she set her mind on something, and this case wasn't something he'd want her to be involved in when she'd be risking her life in the process of it. I don't want to read the media's version. They are liars. I want to hear yours. I need to know what really happened that night and how you got caught up in this mess, from you. You're out of luck then. He stood up, put his glass down, and held out his hand to her. Mia stood up, too, so that he didn't dwarf her and automatically started to put her hand in his, thinking it was an appeasing gesture. Then he burst her bubble by saying, "It's late, let's go to bed and get ourselves busy with something else." Mia quickly snatched her hand back, angry and insulted by his casual attitude of taking her to bed instead of telling her what he intended to do about his case. "I will not. What I'm asking of you is very little compared to what you've demanded of me, and you know it," she said, trying desperately to control her hurt at the fact that he wasn't sharing much with her. "I am not going to go through another description of that day again for you or for anybody else," he snapped, angry at the fact that she wasn't listening to him. "I did it 100 times before the trial for the military and lawyers. It's over. Closed. But I want to help. It's been 5 years, Neil. You have been treated unfairly in prison. Maybe we could work together and find the real." His scornful laugh cut her to the quick. "How could you possibly help me, Mia?" "I could try," she argued. "You can't. And if you know what's best for you, stay out of this." Chapter 165. Please Don't Leave Me. Part 2. "You can't. And if you know what's best for you, stay out of this." "But, drop it, Mia," he warned darkly. "I won't drop it. I have a right to an explanation, Mr. Weiner." "You have no rights to anything, Harrison," Neil snapped. "And I don't need or want your help." Mia stiffened as if he'd hit her. She felt her heart tremble at his words. He didn't need, nor want her, but she'd gotten ahead of herself yet again because she'd somehow believed he loved her and wanted her as much as she did. Mia managed to keep her fury and humiliation out of her voice as she muttered, "I see." And she did. She saw now that he had no use for her at all, except her body. She wasn't supposed to get involved with him. She wasn't supposed to feel anything for him. She was just supposed to amuse him while he was bored and spread her legs for him whenever he was in the mood. She did see. She was nothing but a fleeting amusement. Reaching out, he put his hand on her cheek and said, "Let's go to bed, it's late." "Take your hands off of me, Mr. Weiner," Mia hissed, jerking away out of his reach. Shaking with fury and anguish at her own stupidity, Mia wrapped her arms around her stomach, backing around the sofa and coffee table until she had a free path to her own bedroom upstairs. She didn't want to be beside him when he had no use for her other than her body. It hurt so badly to realize the man she'd loved so much, so very much, would tell her to her face how much he didn't want her. She was even willing to let go of her own life to stay with him, but he was now showing her how little she meant to him. "What the hell are you trying to do?" he asked, frowning darkly at her as she backed away from him. "I'm not trying to do anything. I've just realized what a heartless bastard you really are, Neil." The freezing look on his face as he watched her moving away from him was nothing compared to her own fury. "I was willing to do anything for you, but you've just proven to me how much I am not needed here. And I think you have no intentions of clearing your name, do you?" "That's no concern of yours," he snapped. Mia smiled bitterly. "You are indeed a cold-hearted jerk," she taunted, too furious to tremble before the murderous look tightening his face. She walked up the stairs, turned back, and added scathingly, "I'm leaving here in the morning, and if you intend to stop me, you'd better be prepared to use that gun." He raked her with a contemptuous glance. "Stop you?" he jeered. "I'll carry your bag out of here for you." Mia slammed the bedroom door on his last words. Fighting back her tears, she heard him go into his room as she stripped out of his clothes she'd been wearing and pulled on her own t-shirt from her suitcase. Not until she had turned off the lamp and gotten into bed did she let herself lose control. Dragging the thick blanket up to her chin, she rolled over onto her stomach and buried her face in the pillow. She cried with shame and anger at her stupidity, her inexperience, and her humiliation. She cried until her tears were dried and she was exhausted, then she rolled onto her side, staring blindly out the glass wall at the moonlit winter landscape. In his own bedroom, Neil pulled off his sweater, trying to calm down and forget the scene in the living room, but the effort was futile. Her words hammered in his mind, more agonizing each time he remembered the heartbroken look on her face when she called him a cold-hearted jerk. Before and during his imprisonment, he'd inured himself against feeling anything, but somehow Mia had gotten under his guard. He hated her for that and himself for letting it happen and taking everything to such a level where he'd feel guilty for refusing her something. He hated feeling vulnerable. He shouldn't have allowed her to get into his life to the extent he began to lose his senses for a woman. Flinging his sweater onto the bed, he stripped off his pants. But a realization hit him then, the only plausible explanation for her ridiculous reaction to what he had said in the living room, and he stopped cold in the act of dropping his trousers on the bed. Mia must have thought she was in love with him. That's why she thought she had rights where his life was concerned. And she probably thought he was in love with her, and that he needed her in his life. Neil Wayner had never needed a woman in his life, and not even Mia could be that woman he'd ever need. God damn it, he swore and flung the trousers onto the bed. He didn't need Mia Harrison, and he sure as hell didn't need the added guilt and responsibility for a naive woman who didn't know the difference between sexual desire and that repulsive emotion called love. She would be better off if she hated him. He would be better off, too. Much better off without her in his life. There was nothing between them except sexual desires, which they both wanted right from the time they'd met, and now she was denying them out of it because he'd told her the truth of not needing her. He had never loved her, never. He wasn't the kind to do love. He was never born to be a bastard like his father who was blinded by that emotion. He was different. He was stronger without a woman. He'd lived fine without anyone in his life. He had never had any feelings more than amusement towards Mia. Never, never. He tried so hard to convince himself, and when he couldn't, he thought of a way to prove it to her and to himself that the relationship between them was nothing but sexual. He yanked his door open and headed towards Mia's room and pulled her door open without even bothering to knock. Mia was dismally contemplating what to do tomorrow if he went back on his remark about letting her go when the bedroom door abruptly opened and Neil strode in, wearing only his shorts. "What do you want?" she demanded, sitting up on the bed. "That question," he mocked, sweeping the blanket off of her, "is almost as stupid as your decision to sleep in this bed alone because of some pointless argument." Infuriated by his obvious intention to sleep with her when the last thing she wanted was to be close to him, Mia flung herself to the opposite side of the bed and hurriedly scrambled out of it, trying to bolt quickly for the door. But he caught her as she rounded the foot of the bed and pulled her against his bare chest. "Let go of me, you psychopath. What I want," he informed her, finally answering her original question, "is the same thing you want every time we look at each other, every time we touch." Flinging her head back, Mia stopped struggling, gathering her strength for her next move. "You brainless psycho. If you even think of raping me, I'll murder you with your own gun." "Rape you?" he repeated with icy scorn. "I wouldn't dream of doing such a thing to you. You'll beg me to make love to you in 4 minutes." Mia attacked him just as his mouth seized hers. Bringing her knee up hard, she aimed for his groin and then screamed as she missed and landed on her back beneath his heavy body on the bed. Instead of retaliating for her missed blow to his groin by forcing himself into her, which she half expected him to do, she felt his fingers slide down to her intimate part, probing very lightly, starting to massage and caress with familiar, unerring skill. He wasn't going to force her, Mia realized. He wanted her full cooperation, and if she gave it to him, it would be far more damaging to her pride than being a helpless victim. Her body was already responding against her will, and she was so furious with herself and with him that she actually tried to force him to finish the act before she'd surrender completely and touch him back. "Get it over with, you bastard." His answer was a whisper as cold as his heart. "Why? So you can call me a rapist as well as a murderer and a jerk?" His fingers searched deeper into her, moving slowly. "Not a chance." His mouth closed over her nipple, tongue circling, lips tugging, and Mia swallowed a scream of furious protest as a surge of heat consumed her. She arched her hips beneath his hand, and he laughed softly, sliding his finger deeper inside of her so that she rode it. She stopped abruptly when she realized her mistake, tensing every muscle in her body to resist what he was doing to her, and in silence, he forced her treacherous body to betray her, his eyes watching her face every moment of the time. "You're soaking wet," he whispered, and not even the calculating heartlessness of what he was doing to her could stop the quick, piercing stabs of desire already beginning to jolt her body. "Do you want me, Mia?" She wanted him inside her. She wanted the climax he knew he could give her so badly she felt like she was going to die. "You will rot in hell," she gasped. "I am already in hell, sweetheart," he whispered, moving his body up along hers, and for the first time tonight he kissed her, forcing her lips to part. Abruptly, he gentled the kiss, his lips moving on hers with melting hunger as he slowly moved his hips, forcing her into vibrant awareness of his rigid erection pressing against her entrance. "Tell me you want me, Mia," he coaxed. The moment she surrendered, he drove into her instantly, thrusting his hips hard, driving her to a shattering climax within moments. And when he exploded inside of her, he pulled out while her body was still racked with shudders and lifted off of her, moving free of her embrace. 4 minutes was all it took. "There is a difference between love and sexual desires, and I've just proven that to you," he told her. Before Mia could react, he was out of the room. The door slammed behind him with the finality of his intentions and words. Mia lay there, physically exposed and freezing with shock, unable to absorb the proof that he was actually wicked enough to prove his point in such a way. He proved his point of not wanting anything from her but her body by humiliating her. Emotionally exhausted, she crawled slowly to the head of the bed, pulled the blanket off the floor, and closed her eyes, but she did not cry. She would not shed one more tear because of him again. Ever.